Okay, so there are a lot of bears out there who seem to believe that we're headed for another double dip. This brings us back to the double dip recession idea, especially as the new tax hikes kick in, either because of the new taxes that would be imposed because of health care or because of the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. Both of those will combine simultaneously, we might point out. The stimulus is obviously wearing off. Maybe we need another dose of that. And the monetary stimulus the effect of it begins to fade out. So are we going to see a slide in that respect?
I mean, the burden proof is going to remain on the bulls on whether we can avoid a double dip recession. We know, for example, historically, in fact, the president's own economic advisor, Christine Romer, is an expert, and she's done extensive study on what she calls the tax multiplier. And when you increase taxes, you get a multiplier effect in the reverse direction. So we know, for example, we got massive tax hikes coming next year just from the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. And that could push the economy over the cliff by itself and back into recession. Add to that, especially if they are combined with this new Obamacare tax hike, it's going to savage small businesses. And that's not even talking about the 5% increase in income taxes. So you're talking about, John, the effective tax rate going to 44%. So that's going to be a crippling effect on the economy, and it may be what the leading economic indicators are signaling and telling us right now, that economic weakness lies ahead, and if the economy weakens, that also means that we're going to have higher unemployment.
All right, so are we saying that it looks like another recession next year?
I mean, unless something changes, unless either one, they pass another massive stimulus bill, number two, the Fed does more quantitative easing. A big question right now is one of the things that's rolling over in the leading economic indicators is housing starts. We know, for example, the home buyer's tax credit expires in April. We also know the Fed has said it's not going to subsidize mortgage rates by printing money and buying mortgage securities. So they're anticipating that mortgage rates could increase by a full percentage point. So, John, there are a lot of variables in the mix. But right now, it looks like next year we could be headed into a recession, barring changes in either fiscal stimulus or monetary policy.
So I come back to my theme there, barring more stimulus or other similar functions, we are headed into a double dip type of recessionary scenario here.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we have, for example, the repeal of the Bush tax cuts are going to add $1 trillion of new taxes over the next 10 years. And then this Obamacare adds another $500 billion. So you've got $1.5 trillion. If you look at the tax multiplier effect, for every $1 of tax hike, it translates into a loss of $3 in economic growth. So government policy right now, it's like, John, they do something to stimulate the economy on one hand, for example, the jobs bill, and then on the other hand, they pass a new tax increase that totally counteracts that. So unless this changes, it looks like another recession.
Okay, but what about the trillions of dollars of new spending programs with the Obama administration? Is that going to do anything to keep this afloat?
You know, it's going to depend on what the Fed does. I mean, if you take a look at, for example, when the Clinton tax hikes went into effect in 1993, they were so large and massive that the IRS actually gave taxpayers 2 years to pay for them. In other words, when you filed your 93 tax return, you could extend paying your taxes into the following year. However, Clinton's massive tax increases were offset by a massive monetary stimulus by the Federal Reserve, which gave us the stock market bubble that we saw in the last 5 years of the 90s. But the thing that gave us a lot more stability is when the elections changed in 94, the congressional elections, both Clinton and Congress, to their credit, adhered to fiscal discipline. That's not the case that we have today. The current administration and Congress have gone on a spending orgy that never seems to stop. I mean, 1 month ago, there was a big brouhaha, big fanfare. Congress and the president signed the pay-go laws that says any future spending programs would be paid for with either taxes or spending cuts. 1 week after the bill was passed, they had a $10 billion new spending program. Since that bill was passed, they've had $47 billion of new spending. So if you take a look at that, there is no sign of any kind of spending restraint on part of this administration and Congress. I mean, the big fanfare is the CBO numbers, and we'll get into this in the next segment. It'll save $138 billion supposedly, and this is just a bogus number. But let's assume that this number was real, $138 billion over 10 years. To put that in perspective, last month alone, the federal deficit was $221 billion in one single month, the largest single monthly deficit in this nation's history. So, John, there is no spending restraint here. So who knows what they're going to do? And the other thing that the markets aren't anticipating is a rise in inflation and interest rates. Nobody expects any of these things to occur. And as our listeners are going to hear in a moment here, we are interviewing this week Tony Beck, who used to be the chairman and head of bank credit analyst. And he's got a new book coming out that I've got an advance copy. When this book comes out, it'll be available, I think he said mid-April. It's one of those books I want you to go out and buy. I very seldom endorse books. I read a lot of books, but this is one I'm endorsing. Another one I want you to go out and get is, and we interviewed one of the authors on the program, is This Time It's Different by Reinhardt and Rogoff. And really take a look at this because, as Tony Beck said in the interview this week, he said everybody knows a major financial crisis bigger than anything we've ever seen occur before is approaching. What nobody knows and what nobody is smart enough to know is, does that crisis arrive 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, or 2 years from now? But what everybody knows and what the big money is doing and preparing for is everybody knows it's coming.